Hello, everyone. Welcome to class lecture number 4. I hope you're making good progress on your proposal. I look forward to seeing what you've come up with so far. Let's start out by talking about the foundation site. I recorded a tutorial, and you'll find it under one of the weeks there, and I believe it's just called the Foundation Directory Tutorial. And that will guide you on how to use this tool. It's a fabulous tool, and it's going to be a big part of this class and should really help the organization that you're working with. So be sure and view that and let me know if you have any problem with that. All right, let's start talking a little bit in depth. In the first week, we covered sort of a broad overview of the different areas, but I want to go a little bit more in depth on each area. So let's talk a little more about the process for developing a needs statement. So we're going to start out by defining the problem and then talk about the implications of the problem. In other words, why does it matter? How is it affecting whoever? And then, of course, tying that back to your work in the organization and making sure that everything is in alignment. So in speech making, we use the PCA approach, problem, cause, action, or which leads to solution. It's actually a very common approach in speech making, but it's also a very good approach when you're talking about grant writing, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to say, hey, this is a problem. And in most cases, the vast majority of organizations are going to be community focused. They're not going to be national or international in focus. I mean, it is possible a problem could be a global problem, but for our class and most of the proposals that you're going to be a part of will have more of a community or regional slant. So who are the people that are involved? And what is it you're trying to do? So let's look at each one of these areas and sort of break it down. So as I mentioned in an earlier lecture, there are 5 W's. It's in the old days in journalism, we talked about if you wrote a press release, you included the 5 W's. Well, you do that in grant writing too. So in the problem statement, what is the problem? And you're going to have to define it. You're going to have to really break it down. You're going to have to define what that problem is. Who are the people that are being impacted by it? And by the way, the people impacted by it go deeper than just, so as an example, I use the example of child abuse a lot because I've worked in that field, or domestic violence. So when you answer who is affected, you're not going to say just the child, although that may be the primary one, or in the case of violence, the woman. But then it's going to be the children. It's going to be other family members. It's going to possibly even be her employer. It's going to be who's affected, the child's schooling, educational process. In other words, think of it like a ripple effect. And the who isn't just the direct impact, but it's the broader circle of all the other individuals who are being impacted by this situation. Where is it occurring? Now we know it might, in this case, it's going to be probably in Southwest Missouri or Greene County, Springfield. But I'm talking about also, is there a specific region? Like, is there a higher level of poverty? So in Branson, we know that there's human and sex trafficking. So you could say this primarily occurs in this location, and so be specific on where it is occurring. And then when, how frequently, is this something happening daily? Is it seasonal? Is this something that only happens like a certain time of year, say around the holidays or in the summer when kids are out of school? So be specific on when. And then why? What's causing this to happen? And remember now that has to tie into what you're proposing to do, which is going to be your solution. So when you're talking about the problem recognition, remember, who says it's a problem? So maybe it's something you have witnessed firsthand, and while that could be important, it's simply not enough. Why is it a problem, and who else has seen it as a problem? And do community stakeholders, in other words, would people in the community recognize it, which actually could be a benefit, but on many cases or types of problems, it's not widely understood the depth of the problem. So that's why, as a writer of the proposal, you have to explain this in depth. And then the implications. We talked about this last time, but what's the cost of doing nothing? If no one helps these women in need, if no one helps these vulnerable children, if no one helps these homeless individuals, or whatever cause we're talking about, what's going to happen? I was just having a discussion yesterday with a friend of mine who works in elementary ed, and I told her about how, and I can't cite my source on this, but I know that there was a time when the U.S. Bureau of Prisons was basing the need for capacity on prisons based on fourth grade literacy. You see, now, what I'm saying on that is if a child is not able to read and is illiterate in the fourth grade, the odds of that child not succeeding educationally and in other areas of life were great. So when I say what's the cost of doing nothing, that's the kind of data you need to pull in. Like, what has research shown in other areas and other places when communities don't respond and don't do anything, what happens? So that can be a pretty powerful way to approach it as well. Now, you're going to have to face some of the hurdles in identifying the problems. So number one, you're identifying the challenges. And it's actually okay, because that could strengthen your position to say, as an example, if you're dealing with poverty, you know, our nation has struggled with poverty. Well, I guess always, but if you go back even so far as to FDR and his new initiatives to address poverty and the war on poverty and all the presidential administrations that have addressed poverty, you might want to say what has worked and what hasn't worked. And then you come down to that second area. What's the gap between what exists now and what ought to be? And how is what you're proposing going to work, whereas maybe previous situations haven't worked? What was the gap? And what are you doing then to resolve that? You know, one of the major things I believe we talked about in week one, major funders want to be part of organizations that are solving problems, not just serving problems. So what has prevented the resolution of the problem so far? How come these other programs didn't work? And how is your organization going to address those? The fifth component of a good problem or need statement is the urgency. Now, I would like to think that most of the problems we're talking about are pretty urgent. Like, you know, it needs to be done now. And then you can actually say why it needs to be done now and how serious the problem is. So address the urgency, and then that should help you align with your response to say, we are in place to respond now. We can do something right now. The sixth component of the good problem or need statement is what solving the problem means. In other words, how come someone else needs to do this? So it could be a situation where you're in a low-income neighborhood, they don't have the resources, or maybe you're in a rural area and no one has the resources, or what if no one has the knowledge to do it and your organization is going to come in now? So if you can do this thing, if you're funded, how are you going to solve the problem? Why is it urgent right now? And I referred to this earlier, but you know, a personal testimony is really powerful. So now it's possible that the work that you're proposing to do is not entirely new. Maybe your organization has done it at some level before or in a different place. If you can, pull in those success stories. However, you may also just need to pull in a human interest story or a story of suffering. And what I mean by that is, you know, here's the story, and in class I've used the story of an individual who lived in poverty her whole life. Her whole life, she worked at a fast food place. I believe it was Wendy's, but maybe it was a Hardee's, I'm not sure. And this was documented. I could share the video link on this story. It was a story about poverty in America. Now listen to this. She walked 14 miles a day, 7 miles each way, one way, because she didn't have a car. She made minimum wage, but she walked in the rain, in the snow, whatever, so she could feed her family. Now, if she'd had resources, if she'd had help, she could have done a lot more. So what I'm saying is, if you can bring in real stories of real people who either have been helped or who are suffering and need help, that can be powerful. All right, your need statement can't just be your opinion. It absolutely must be supported with credible evidence that can be brought in from a variety of sources. In other words, it can't just be we think, we feel, we believe, because what your organization or thinks or feels, while that may be valuable, it simply is not enough. So one of the things that you're going to have to do is you need local data. Now, most of the sources that are available online are not local. You're going to find information maybe from the state or from federal, from different bureaus, but it can be challenging to get local data. But you need local data to support your problem. You can't just say, the National Something Center has said that it's a problem nationwide. Well, it may be, but if a funder is giving money to do a local problem, there has to be some proof that a local problem actually exists. And then that need, again, absolutely must connect with the work your organization is already doing and plans to do. And then there's that sweet spot, that alignment, because you've done your homework, you've researched the funder and the foundation, you know what they have said they care about, you see what kind of foundation or money they've given into the past to different organizations, and you know that it aligns. So as you write your need statement, you actually can bring in the fact that this is a perfect match for them because of their investment and great concern for this cause. All right, and some just basic rules on credible information. Number one, data that's 10 years old is no good. I mean, you know, the world's changing every day, and outdated data means nothing. So make sure it's timely. Timely, I could give you 5 years. That's not great, but I could give you 5 years. 3 years is better, 2, and then anything better, newer is of course better. You want unbiased data. University research is good. Avoid groups that are tied to political advocacy or political affiliation. Those tend to be biased, and that doesn't mean they aren't necessarily accurate, but they lose their credibility because they are agenda driven. So avoid those. But if you can, it's also good to just get the stories and opinions of others. So do other people in your community, have there been other reports? Does the health department have information? Does the Chamber of Commerce have information? Any source like that that you can pull in is actually good. So again, here are some examples: federal, state, local, county, any data like that. You can use the Census Bureau, Department of Health, Department of Labor, Bureau of Labor Statistics, anything like that you can pull in. Colleges and universities, especially larger universities, research universities, put out a lot of good information. You could probably get some from them. Businesses and corporations sometimes do research. You can pull in media stories, and you can do your own research. It's okay to say, we did a study for 6 months and found out this, or we've compiled our data. We collect data, and we know from our data that this is, as an example, you could say, the need is greater than it was 6 months ago. Our requests for help have doubled in the past 12 months. You see where I'm going to that? So you can use your data as well. That's okay, but you can't use only your data. You need to pull in other sites. So here are a couple places that you could go to get information: census.gov, fedstats.gov is a good site, BLS. If you've never looked at the site city-data.com, it's actually a pretty good site, and you could source them. They list a lot of information on cities and communities and states, so that would be really good. The Annie E. Casey Foundation, AECF, is an excellent resource with a ton of data. Now, if you're based in Missouri, and all of the groups you're working with are Missouri, there is something called OSEDA, and that stands for the Office of Social and Economic Data Analysis. You can see it's through the University of Missouri, and there is their website, oseda.missouri.edu. This is a fantastic website. You can choose your cause, and then you can compare it. So I would really, really encourage you to look at this site. So as an example, again, if we were talking about, let's say, teen pregnancy, you could choose Greene County. Then you could go in and compare Greene County to other counties in the state. So you could say, how does Greene County compare to like Jefferson City, or a county near Kansas City or Northeast Missouri or wherever. And you can show side-by-side numbers. You can show only 1 year, or you can do a trajectory. Or you can just choose one county and show how things have changed over and I think that the graph, I want to say it goes 10 years. I'm not certain about that, but you can show changes in indicators of well-being. It's a great resource. I would encourage you to get on there and play and show that to your organization and let them. All right, so it's not that easy to take this big grand idea and convert it, but that's the key, is putting this into a concise, readable, understandable plan that everybody can read, no matter what their knowledge is on the topic, and it all fits together from top to bottom. Everything is thorough, everything ties together, everything makes sense. Then you're going to start convincing them. And I mean, this is a key. Just keep in mind that for every grant dollar available, there are too many proposals, so they need to be hooked quickly. The reviewer needs to hear an idea, have a vision, and see a concise, detailed plan, and then they're going to want to dig deeper into your proposal and maybe even to talking to you further about the idea. All right, now let's talk about some more about the goals and objectives which you are going to be writing. So goals are that big, broad, visionary thing where we want to do this huge thing of wipe out all abuse, reduce hunger, eliminate teen drug use. That's big and broad in the world you're trying to create. So those are the big, broad things. And then we get into the objectives. So objectives are going to be the more operational things that you're doing and the very measurable things that you're doing. So I want to emphasize the term degree of intended change. That's a real important term for grant writing and really just for your work in the nonprofit industry. How much are you intending to improve things? To what degree are you going to improve things? So let's say, as an example, only 25%. Let's say there's an illiteracy rate of 25% in Springfield. If you had a literacy program, you might seek to raise that literacy rate or to eliminate the illiteracy rate by 5% in the first year, to change it from 25% to 20%. You see how now that's measurable. Or you could say currently only X percentage of adults in Greene County have books and read to children. And through our program, our 1 or 2 year program, through all of the activities, we are intending to improve that by 5%. So in other words, you can't just say, we want things to be better. You actually have to get very specific. Okay, here's some of the goals again. World hunger, rates. So the kind of words are going to be a little vaguer, improve, create, eliminate. And that's a pretty absolute term. I might be cautious about using that phrase. And okay, and just some examples again. So these are a bit, they're ambitious, they're broad, and it's not something that's going to typically occur in a year. It's going to take some time. But what you're trying to do then is you're trying to say, this is what we're trying to do. So in that process, as you're writing the goal, ask yourself, what's the condition we're trying to change or eliminate or prevent? And number 2, what is that long-term condition for our recipients? So I referred to this earlier, it's the magic wand. If you took the wand and waved it and said, now the world looks the way we want it to look as it relates to our cause, how would it look? All right, so those are the goals. Now, in order to achieve the goal, there are things you're going to have to do, and we would call these objectives. So just think of objectives as the steps, the smaller accomplishments that are going to have to be made in order to reach that goal. So you may have 2 or 3 at most, you might have 4, but the objectives are the things that are going to occur. And these are, again, the measurable things that have to occur. So outcome objectives Do not describe methods. We're going to talk about methods later. And remember, outcomes determine how and if your organization can measure the change projected. So I would say no more than 4, but probably 3. It really depends, but 3 is probably more manageable. Here's an example of what I'm talking about. Again, we want to end child abuse. One of the things that'll have to happen before we end it is we have to increase by 50% parents and caregivers' understanding of abuse. And now we're going to get into the method or strategy of what we're trying to do. So if you wanted to write a good objective, here's what it needs to include. Number 1, the time frame. Within 1 year, we seek to, or within the next 6 months, we're going to. Whatever that is, you have to include the time frame. And then the target group. Who is it you're serving? So list the target group and then the number of people impacted. So you can't say, we intend to help people know things better. You'd actually say, percentage-wise, this is the percentage of people, or you could say a specific number. We're setting, our objective is to reach 500 people and change them this way. And then what's the change, the degree of change that you're seeking, and then where. So now the where, of course, if your organization's serving Greene County or Springfield or wherever, but is there something more specific, like on the west side of campus or something like that, if that is necessary. So I put an example down there. Implement a training program by June that will educate 200 pregnant women living in Springfield, increasing their knowledge. So you can see the time frame, by June, we're going to do it. The target group, pregnant women. The number, 200 of them. The action, increase their knowledge. And then the service area in the Springfield city limits. So that one line has all 5 of those conditions in there. And then just so in case you've wondered about the types of objectives, there are 3 different types. The first type is going to be what we would call an initial objective. So that's not the end, but that's the first thing that you want to do. Then the immediate, so the intermediate is going to be something that probably could happen, along the way. Now, that's probably not short term. That's something, again, that might occur within 3 or 6 months, maybe 90 days of doing something. And then the long-term outcome is the long-term impact. So we'll be looking at a logic model coming up, you can kind of see these are not always listed that way. It could be short-term, intermediate, long-term, but these are some different type of objective outcomes. Here are some good words for you. If you're thinking about what to put in an objective, I just wanted to give you a list of some different words that you can use to kind of understand the different ways to say it or different approaches to take. All right, now let's shift gears. We've talked about the goal, we've talked about the objectives. In order to accomplish an objective, you absolutely must have a strategy or a method. Now, the 2 terms are used interchangeably, and I tend to put them up there a lot because depending on your funder, they may call it a strategy, they may call it a method, I don't know. So I want to just use those fluidly, and also, but methods I think might be a little more common. So the objective was what you're going to do. The method or strategy is how you're going to go about doing it. So as an example, if you want to elevate understanding of child abuse, do you only have to do one thing? Well, you probably have to do several. So if you had 3 objectives, now you're going to have some strategies. So strategy 1, number 1, what needs to occur? Number 2, who's going to do it? When are the start dates? And can I really do it? So who's going to be the person responsible? As an example, you might say, our program director will oversee the implementation of, okay? And then you would actually get into the time frame. One method might be to develop a media plan. I mean, I'm just throwing out random ideas. You might actually, if you're going to have a training program, you're going to have to come up with a site. So you're going to have, maybe one of the methods or strategies is to secure the site. You may need equipment. So possibly if you're going to be Doing something out in communities, you might actually have to buy a laptop. You may need to buy a video projector or screen to travel with you. In other words, every detail. You may have to contact people in other cities to set up meetings. So all of these details, these are the kinds of things that you're going to have to include in your strategy. So I throw up some examples. Program director will spend 20 hours per week coordinating the program. The program, then we go a little bit further, will be held inside the Midtown Library, and I even say when. The program requires, so here are some things we're going to need. Books, we need to buy those. We're going to have to buy pillows for the kids to sit on, a projector, and a microphone. We'll assume we already own the laptop. I'm going to give the date. The program runs from here to here. And then the second success of the program will be based in terms of the objective, reading 4 hours each week to 15 children. So all the elements are going to be included in that, and that explains just that one objective right there, but it includes all the elements. Okay, preparatory activities. Think through who you're going to need, your staffing, where it's going to occur, your equipment, every piece of material you're going to need, because this may require you to do something in advance, like develop it, design it, print it. Who do you need to work with? You might need to collaborate with the library, another nonprofit, a chamber of commerce, somebody out there somewhere. And then the program related activities, just think about these. If you're training, you need to develop programs, you need curriculum, you may need to provide counseling or support services, some sort of provision for resources, and some sort of advocacy possibly. You may need to contact state representatives or your senator, or go to have contact with someone at the Capitol. All right, and these are just some examples then of training or education. What's the content? And this even comes down to the cultural. So if you're serving a certain demographic, don't just throw out any training. Think about what fits best for the demographic, and think about the best person to conduct the demographic. What's going to be most effective? Say if you're working in a poverty neighborhood versus a higher education group. What if you're working with Caucasians versus Native American versus African American? In other words, take into consideration all these different aspects. So there's a visual example for you. The goal is that big broad thing at the top. We get specific under each objective because this is something we're going to have to do. At least 3 steps, but it could be 4. And then under each one of those objectives, we're going to describe all of those things under the methods or strategies. And that, if you use this as a goal and use this as a model for what you're doing, that's going to break it down for you very simply and cleanly. All right, so assignment 4 coming up soon, where you will write your goals and objectives. Now remember, don't get specific on the goal. You'll have a chance to do that later. Goals should be short and brief. Make sure the objectives have that number in them. They must be quantifiable. Refer back to the SMART objectives that we used in that follow that guide. You only have one goal, but you can have multiple objectives, and of course, lots of methods under those. And remember, it's an outcome, not a process. And then the second part of that will be writing your methods, where you explain all those details that we just talked about. Make sure you include all the details. Look at your text and make sure it addresses all of the 6 questions listed on page 64. And thinking even further, we will be talking about the evaluation in our next lecture. You will be writing the evaluation portion to say how we know if this thing worked, how we're going to measure it. So that's important. And that will also, in part of that assignment, will include a timeline where you're going to create a chart, a template that actually explains when things happen. And by the way, everything has to align. So when you talk about things in your objectives of when and who, that has to translate right over to your calendar and your timeline that shows when things happen. So this, as you can see, takes organization and a lot of detail. So as I said from the very first, plan ahead, have good contact. That way you don't have to keep contacting your organization. Let him or her know all of the details and things you're going to be needed, because this will get on top of you quickly. And just like if you were applying to a funder, they don't allow any late submissions, and neither will we in the class. All right. Okay, that's all for today. Thank you very much.